Hello everyone, my name is Nicolas Sauvage, President of TDK Ventures. Welcome to our much-awaited Energy Week 2022, where we will discuss a range of topics related to energy transformation, electrification, and beyond. Our first session is very special, with a fireside chat of our esteemed guest, Meghan Sharp, the Global Head of Decarbonization Partners, a joint venture between BlackRock and Temasek. Meghan oversees deal origination, investment execution, and value creation across decarbonization partners' portfolios. Meghan has significant experience in VC investing and in the technology industry. I first met Meghan where she was leading BP Ventures, and I still remember being so impressed from the panel she was in at GCV Monterey in early 2019, even before TDK Ventures started. Needless to say, I am a fan. Meghan has made over 70 investments across decarbonization sector, including advanced mobility, bio, and low carbon products, power and storage, and carbon management. Meghan, welcome to Energy Week 2022, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Nicholas. I'm thrilled to be here. Can you see and hear me okay?
Perfect.
Wonderful.
I know many in the audience joined to learn from you, and we hope to make this fireside chat also their chance to communicate with you. So while I have many questions for you, I would also invite and encourage people in the room to post their questions in the chat so that we can ask you their questions. Great. Now let us start. Meghan, I like the very straightforward name of Decarbonization Partners, showing the laser focus of the fund to invest in the next generation of innovative decarbonization solutions. So you won't be surprised, I will start my questions from decarbonization. What does it mean and why now?
Fantastic. Thank you, Nicholas. And just before I kick off, I'll also say that I also remember our first meeting at GCV in Monterey, and we've had many follow-up conversations since. So I'm excited that we're going to get to have our next conversation here, although in front of an audience. So decarbonization, I'll start with a big number, and a number that I'm sure you and many in the audience have heard as well, and that's 4.5 trillion. Experts estimate that $4.5 trillion will need to be invested every year from now until 2050 to deliver net carbon zero. It's a massive number. It's a massive investment number. And I like to say, as a global citizen, that number's overwhelming. Like, how are we going to do that? What are all the sources of capital? And how do we take that capital and deploy it toward the right innovations to actually deliver net carbon zero by 2050 or sooner? What's really interesting about the $4.5 trillion number is roughly 50% of it is accounted for. What do I mean by that? We know about 50% will go into opportunities that already are commercialized: wind, solar, to some degree EV, although we still know a fair amount of innovation needs to happen in the mobility to get the level of adoption across the transportation sector. But the other 50% is largely unaccounted for. And what I mean by that is it will need to be invested in nascent technologies that are ready to scale, or technologies that haven't even been invented yet. So while it's a daunting number as a global citizen, how are we all going to do this together? As innovators, if you're on the startup side, and as asset managers, if you're on the financing side, it's a historic investment opportunities for clients and corporations. So really, and I can tell you more about the structure of decarbonization partners later in the conversation, but Temasek and BlackRock saw that investment opportunity. Also, we're passionate about decarbonization, and so decided to get together and double down on this historic investment opportunity and do something together. And they felt like doing it together in a form of partnership could be more impactful. All right. So that's really the genesis. And to be clear, that decarbonization is exactly what it sounds like. What we're focusing on is investing in innovations that decarbonize our future to try and reach net carbon zero by around 2050. It's very fundamental. It's pure decarbonization.
Fundamental and critical. Actually,
Yes.
I'm going to double click on something you just mentioned about the other 50%,
Yeah.
nascent technology and technology not invented yet. Can you give us your sense of how much is nascent technology that's already there needing investors versus the one not yet invented?
Okay, so that's a tricky question, as you well know, Nicholas. What I can say is that where we're focused on right now is on nascent technologies that need to be scaled up. All right, so I'll get back to the other technologies that haven't been invented yet. And part of the reason we're focused on what we call late venture early growth is because we do believe there is an entire pool of technologies that can help fundamentally and impactfully deliver net carbon zero by 2050 that needs scale up capital. And to put a finer point on it, Nicholas, we're looking at companies that have pilot plants today that are making products, corporations, potential customers are testing and trialing today, but they're ready to scale up and create their first commercial plants. And that's really where we want to play. I know you've been investing in the space a long time, so as 10 years ago, people didn't want to invest in a first commercial facility. There was too much risk. And that's exactly where we want to play. It requires big dollars, but that's what's going to get these companies to scale, where we can invest in the first plant, the second plant, and really that money's coming into Topco. And then really our parent companies like BlackRock and Temasek can start doing project finance for plant 3, plant 4, plant 5. That's the whole purpose here. How do we reach scale? So at least where I'm focused on in this particular junction of my career is let's take the technologies that are largely proven today, where the science has been borne out, the R&D has already been borne out. It's not binary technology risk anymore. Let's take the ones where we have largely proven technology and let's help build that first commercial plant. Because I don't have to tell you, that's the proverbial valley of death. And so we're taking what I would call engineering risk, not R&D risk, science risk. So that's where I'm focused on. But of course, there are still technologies where we need that seed capital and the Series A to come in and take that binary technology risk and create technologies that don't exist today. What are those two pools? I don't know, and I don't know the difference in capital, but both pools exist is the point. But those technologies that are ready to scale today will have a nearer term impact in decarbonization than the ones that have not yet been invented. And we know those timelines are much longer than we used to believe. Seed, Series A, those are not 10-year time horizons. We know that, right? That was one of the many hard lessons from Clean Tech 1.0. I'll stop there. I didn't quite answer your question. It could be 50-50, but it could be another number. But both pools are important, and both pools require capital.
I'm actually hopeful it's mostly nascent technologies where we, both of us and everyone in the audience, can actually contribute. But I like your point about scaling. At TDK Ventures, we call the entrepreneurs the impact scalers because they want to bring positive impact and scale it so that it's actually really reach many, many people. And so I'll talk about Clean Tech 1.0 a bit later, but let's go for vision first, the future. What is the vision in your mind for decarbonization? And how far are we now of this decarbonization goal?
You know, I still talk about 2050 or sooner because I'm an optimist. All right. I think there's a fair number of experts in the world that believe it's probably closer to 2060 before we reach net carbon zero. And there are some experts that certainly would presume that we've already missed the 1.5 number. And now we're trying to close in on that, not letting climate rise above 2%. Right? So it is a journey, but none of us would be in the business that we're in if we weren't inherently optimist. You can't be a venture capitalist and not be an optimist. So for us, we're holding that clear line of sight to that 2050 goal. As you know, countries, corporates, all over the world have 2030 goals, 2040 goals. A lot of people have focused on how can they get to net zero by 2050. So I think we all just have to stay laser focused on that. What's everything that we can do? And it's a really interesting time because not only do we have countries, corporates, shareholders, stakeholders demanding net zero solutions on that pathway to net zero, but it's customer demand as well. It is the macro environment, even with everything else going on, is still hugely supportive in not only what does 2050 look like, but what are we still trying to do by 2030? And what are we trying to do by 2040?
When you say customer demand, I'm assuming you mean both the big companies as well as the consumers.
Absolutely. And I think that, we're seeing that more and more. And we're seeing companies that used to just focus on one part of their supply chain now demanding proper life cycle analysis for upstream and downstream and that supply chain, really go into the raw materials that they use, the commodities that are going into their processes, and trying to understand the entire life cycle, which is the appropriate way to do a life cycle, but the entire life cycle of their products. And you're absolutely right. Just people like you and me are starting to demand much more sustainable and green products. We want to understand our own carbon footprint in the world and how we're contributing to it. And net carbon zero takes every single one of us. My life isn't net carbon zero. I still have a carbon intensive life. And we're constantly, as individuals, I think, those of us especially interested in the space, are still looking to try and understand what are all the contributing factors to the carbon intensity of our lives globally and as individuals, and what are the ways that we can mitigate it.
Now, when we talk about contributing factors, we see a lot of things happening which are external to what people are in control. Energy crisis, European energy dependency with the war in Ukraine, geopolitical shifts and risk. How do you see that impact or compromise or accelerate the progress of decarbonization?
Yeah, so I'll give you my answer and then I'll go back and give you some data points, okay? So I think it's accelerating decarbonization. I don't think it's going to slow it down. To use a phrase, the horse has left the barn, right? It's happening, and we as a global society are on this journey. Is it going to be a perfectly linear journey? No. We all know that the curve goes up and to the right, upper right-hand corner, but it's a complicated curve to get there. But the trajectory is going to remain. We have no choice. And I think as a global society, that is much more accepted now than it was even 5 years ago. To give you a couple of interesting data points, I remember right when the pandemic hit, and I was at BP at the time, and oil prices had fallen through the floor, and all the energy majors were struggling, to put it mildly. And Bernard Looney had announced his net carbon zero initiatives by 2050 or sooner. And I remember him saying, even with all of this going on, oil prices through the floor, it makes the case even further for diversification of energy, which by definition is decarbonization. And then in recent history, when everything was happening with the Russian-Ukraine war, et cetera, and oil prices were going through the roof, the opposite situation, a very different CEO, Larry Fink, the CEO of BlackRock, said, this calls for diversification of energy from a security point of view, as well as a decarbonization point of view. And that by definition is diversification, and diversification of energy resources by definition is decarbonization. So to me, all the macro forces are still in place, regardless of oil prices, up, down, regardless of what happens, even with the Russian-Ukraine war, people, and goodness knows what's happening in Europe right now is incredibly challenging. It will be a complicated path, but the path will still be to net carbon zero. And my personal belief is all of this will accelerate it versus slow it down.
You promised a few data points.
Okay, well, the data points I was using was kind of Bernard's view when oil prices fell, and kind of Larry's view when oil prices went through the roof. Okay. And I can also give you one other data point, actually. When I'm out talking to clients and startups, at least in where we mostly engage, Nicholas, and in the private markets, okay, so I think the public markets are a little bit more complicated, but certainly in the private markets, we have a very long-term view. And because we look at 10, 12 years with our startups and our co-investors, those kind of investors have the long view, and they still believe in that historic investment opportunity. And they're frankly not distracted, however big they are, by the short-term market volatility that we're experiencing right now. In the public markets, that's a little bit more complicated. But in the private markets, no one's pulling back from investment in climate tech and decarbonization. If anything, people are doubling down. But again, those investors have a longer view. They're not distracted by the short term.
And that's very encouraging and inspiring. Talking about diversification, I think it's a good segue to what do you see as the most important sectors to be decarbonized? And which sector do you think is moving the needle now?
So for us, our perception, and a lot of this comes from the BlackRock and Temasek view, we're really focused on, we technically invest in 6 sectors, but 3 of them fully represent the question you're answering. So advanced mobility, we all know transportation is a huge, huge piece of the solution, and widespread, the electrification of everything, the electrification of transformation has to happen. What's really interesting to me is how much of it is going to be about charging station versus what's the role of battery swapping, right? I think that we've discounted that too easily because of what happened with Better Place quite a while back, right? People got scared of battery swapping, any of you that remember the Better Place story, but there's still a role for that, certainly with fleets and in various cities. So transportation's huge. Of course, battery technology associated with advanced mobility and all up and down the supply chain of advanced mobility, from the components, right? And how do you source components that are also sustainable and decarbonized? So it's a complicated supply chain in transportation and batteries. Of course, we all know energy and hydrogen, huge, huge part of the story. And green materials. I guarantee everyone in the audience, you, Nicholas, you're wearing a petroleum-based product, you're sitting in a petroleum-based chair, all around you are carbon-intensive materials. And we'll have to replace all those. To get to 2050, we have to replace all of the materials around us with decarbonized versions, right? And so what's interesting about this question is, even if you look at our own portfolio, it's kind of the old problem of people said, hey, if you just want to make a quick buck, just invest in software. Don't invest in the hardware, right? But that doesn't solve the problem. You don't get to the point. So even in our own portfolio, and we do a deep analysis of the decarbonization impact, the potential decarbonization impact of every single investment that we make. So we call ourselves a dual purpose fund, financial returns first and foremost, but every single deal we do has to have a measurable decarbonization impact. There's wild differences in the investments that we've done. So you could easily argue, based on our own experience, why are you doing materials? It has less of a decarbonization impact than, for example, potential hydrogen deals or advanced mobility deals, based on our own analysis. And what I always answer is, because in a 2050 world, in a net zero world, you have to decarbonize everything. And you can't wait and just start doing we know it's a journey. So on the one hand, Nicholas, we can talk about more carbon intensive sectors, but on the other hand, we have to focus on all of them, because all of them have to be decarbonized to reach net zero. Does that make sense?
I actually love this answer. And I think you framed it right. It's with 2050 in mind. It's not just about the low hanging fruit, the obvious places, everywhere.
Exactly. Oh, wow. So people will ask me every now and then, what is your target goal for the whole fund for your decarbonization output? I said, if we just did that, then all you would want to do is get to the biggest number possible. And it would create the wrong behavior in the investment team, because they would only go after opportunities that are the biggest bang for your buck from a decarbonization point of view, not from an investment returns. And I said, but a balanced portfolio in many ways, we all have to focus on decarbonizing everything. We have to start now. We can't wait. We can't just do the big low-hanging fruit now and then push everything else off. It won't get us there. So a little bit of a different take than you might hear.
No, I love it. I mean, you talked about long-term view of 10 to 12, but now I'm saying your lens is 2050. So this is really cool. So if we look at the players in the space, of course, you have in the audience startups, government, investors, many companies, small and big. Who has the most potential for positive impact and getting to that 2050 line successfully?
So the answer is in the name. So decarbonization partners. And that's not just about BlackRock and Temasek partnering. The whole concept there was our entire approach and philosophy to investing in the space is through partnerships. That's co-investors, it's management teams, it's government dollars, it's partnerships with corporations. And to get there, this is a huge problem. And every single one of these companies is a heavy lift. Okay. I'm running towards what investors have run away from for a long time, which is CapEx heavy, hardware, first plants, right? But that's what we got to invest in. And about 25% of our portfolio will be software too. And I can talk about why that's important in a minute. But these are heavy lifts that require project finance, debt financing from the government, that require strategic partnerships. And we need really good people sitting around the table with us that are sophisticated, ready to roll up their sleeves and help us in this heavy lift. And when we invest, certainly things that we look for are where we can be value add beyond that dollar. And I know lots of investors say that, but I promise you, we mean it, not just from the actual Decarbonization Partners team members who are all deep, experienced investors in the space, but what's the value add that BlackRock and Temasek can bring? When do we start talking to the funds about project finance? These are two companies that can open any door in the world in terms of strategic partnerships. So when a startup needs to talk to a company, we can get into the C-suite if we need to. It's about that global footprint. It's about that global scale, because without that global scale, we can't reach the financial returns or the decarbonization impact that we want. And by the way, that should be a virtuous circle, right? The more commercially successful something is, the bigger the decarbonization impact. The bigger the decarbonization impact, the more successful the commercial impact and scale should be. Just to give a couple of real examples, Temasek is helping us, a company, look at their second plant. We've invested in their first plant, but their second plant will need to be in Asia, near the logistics and supply chain there. Tomasek's helping us understand local labor laws, opening doors there. BlackRock's helping us with various relationships in the Middle East and Australia. So it really is about value add and partnerships. But to answer your question, in our own portfolio, now one of our companies has $1 billion loan guarantee from the DOE. It's going to take all these sources of capital, all these sources of expertise, working collaboratively and in partnership, because this is a heavy lift.
First, I like everything you say, but I really like the way you've described the virtual circle, because most people think you have to do good or you have to do well. You can do both, and actually, if you do both, you're more likely to actually have the impact you want. So thank you for describing it, because I think that really matters a lot. And I also like all the goodness you've just described. It's really nice. Now, if we double click a bit on industrial decarbonization, which I think is a low-hanging fruit in some ways, and I know you want to touch everything, but let's talk about a big one. What are the exciting technologies that you think could be game changers?
I've mentioned a little bit about this before. We know that increased battery technology is going to be really important for vehicles, but also it's up and down that supply chain that we're really going to have to look at in the component parts as well. We're also really interested in hydrogen. We think that that is a very important area of investment. Now, I don't have to tell you what's interesting about hydrogen. This is the conundrum. And again, you throw yourself in that 2050 world. You know hydrogen is going to be important in 2050. It's going to be throughout transportation and buildings and industry. We know it's a part of the solution, but we also know it's not mature today. We can't move it around very easily. We don't have a lot of use cases for it easily. But the conundrum is we have to start creating those opportunities now, right? So it's a tricky area for investment, but a really important area for investment. And it's a little of the cart before the horse. You have to have supply in order for the demand to come online and say, okay, it's actually ready to use it. But there's this whole piece of the story. I'm going to digress slightly from your question. There's this whole piece of the story which I think about and often get overwhelmed when I start thinking about it. But we're all going to have to start thinking deeply about it, those that are in the space. So we're all investing in these standalone opportunities that as standalones have enormous impact and are very important. All right, whether it's in materials, mobility, or energy. But there's a huge piece of two kinds of infrastructure that have to come online for those standalone to be successful. And it's the physical infrastructure, like the pipelines that need to be upgraded to be able to move hydrogen around. That's just one example. But it's also the digital infrastructure. A 2050 world is a smart world. A 2050 world is a connected world. right? And that's the digital infrastructure that has to come on play, because all these hardware pieces have to be made as efficient and as optimized as possible to reach net carbon zero. So I heard someone use an interesting word, and I'm going to steal it from them. I was calling it the digital and physical infrastructure that's needed. It's this giant puzzle piece to put together. And they called it the connective tissue. And it's this very complicated puzzle that we all have to put together. So that's kind of one piece of the story. What I'll also say, Nicholas, is CCUS plays a huge part of this: carbon capture, utilization, and storage. A lot of purists are like, oh no, if you're really going for a 2050 world, you should just be investing in the opportunities that bring this to zero, right? But we know the transition is going to be require, yes, decarbonize these technologies as much as possible, but then we need CCUS to take out the rest of the CO2. And we need those technologies to get cheaper and cheaper as they scale and more accessible, because they're critically important to reaching net zero. And to be honest, we'll probably need some version of CCUS for a very long time, even in a 2050 world.
I love the way you describe the connective tissue, because it's all about this dependency and this complexity, and you touch something, it impacts something else. And it talks about the complexity of energy transformation. And your journey from oil and gas to today, I mean, you've seen the incumbents, you see the nascent technology, you see the startups, the investors. Can you talk about what is so complex for the audience to understand the space of energy transformation, and how to think about incumbent versus new?
They all have a role to play. And I feel like I've said that a couple of times today, and it feels like I'm hedging my bets. But the whole reason I was at BP and my role at BP was to support BP through the energy transition. That was the purpose of the venture capital group. We have a hope of reaching net carbon zero without taking at least some of the energy majors along. Will all of them make it? No, but we need some of them too. And I've said this before, and somebody actually said to me 20 years ago, if you looked at the companies that are the biggest companies in the world today, they didn't even exist. Facebook didn't exist. The biggest companies in the world today didn't exist 20 years ago, right? So we can't even begin to imagine, Nicholas, who's going to be the next BP or Shell. They might not exist today. And 20 years ago, think about how we felt about IBM or GE. Those were the biggest, most successful companies in the world. And things are different today and their place in the world than they were 20 years ago. So some of the established players will still be live today. Some of them might even be incredibly successful. I hope so, because if they are, we will reach our net zero journey faster. But there are companies that we're investing in today, or that don't even exist yet, that will be the largest companies in the world 20 years from now. They'll be the next Apples, they'll be the next Facebook. And it's extraordinary to think about that. And I can't wait. I can't wait until you and I are talking in 20 years, Nicholas, at Energy Week 2042.
Okay.
And we're going to have a conversation at Energy Week 2042. And we're going to talk about what are the top 3 companies in the world.
We have a date. This is good. I really like the way you're thinking about 2050 and what will be true by then, and then looking backward. I'll put one more data point, which is, I think, very encouraging too, which is if you think about Microsoft, Apple, Amazon, they took between 20 to 30 years to get to $1 trillion market capitalization. I think Tesla took 12 years. And I would not be surprised, to your point, that there are companies not yet started could get massive impact. I mean, market capitalization is about impact at the end of the day. And I think is very encouraging that we have firms like yours who are capable to invest and help scale these companies to have that massive impact. So let's talk about the global innovation map of decarbonization. I'd love to hear your perspective about that globalization, but also localization.
Yeah, so again, I don't have to tell this group or you that climate is a global problem, not a local problem. And what you'll hear various people at BlackRock talk about is that the transition, while necessary, also has to be done in a fair and just way. And so the complication here is the transition done in the wrong way. We already have a kind of a poverty and not divide across the globe. And you could widen that very quickly with the wrong conversations around how to decarbonize and how to decarbonize quickly. All right. You don't want to force a group of people into further poverty and adverse circumstances. So the transition, while necessary, has to be a just one. Now, having said that, the planet isn't going to be in a place where we aren't decarbonizing quickly enough. It's those same populations, to be honest, which will be more adversely hurt than some of the rest of us. Okay, so it is this real global challenge as a global society. So I think that's important to put out there, right? Just as we're thinking about global dynamics. But if we're just looking at where the innovation is and how do we invest in it, we still see, and just in terms of completely opportunistically, we're across the globe. We still see about 50% of the pure innovation opportunities in the right stage and sectors that we're looking at. 50% in North America, and about 25% in Asia, and about 25% in Europe. What's interesting, though, is that investment dollars and the support from governments, Europe and APAC have been ahead and moving much quicker than Europe in investing in the space and confidence in investing in the space and really trying to move climate tech forward. What I think will be interesting for all of us to watch is the IRA, as you all know, just came out. Huge piece of legislation in the US. And we're going to see what kind of momentum that lights under US investors to more confidently start investing in the space. So I'm really eager to watch that because they've been slow and they're definitely behind their APAC and European counterparts. Just as one example, one of our portfolio companies, just from the IRA, because of course we don't do any green premiums or tax credits in our underwrite, it's likely doubled in value. Like the IRA has a huge impact from an investment perspective. So the conundrum, Nicholas, is where you see the innovation and where you see the investment is a little flipped. But the IRA has the potential to be a real game changer in the US. Now, I think what we need to be careful of is, again, it doesn't matter how much capital you deploy, you have to deploy it correctly under the right innovations. You can't just be throwing it around, right? So we've got some big dollars that we can spend now, but we got to spend it wisely.
I can't agree more. And you talk about not underwriting for your investments with this type of grants. Can you speak about why this discipline? I think it's very important, but why do you not assume that when you make investments?
So far, what our position is that we don't underwrite assuming any tax credits or green premiums. In fact, when we do diligence, we want to see that as these companies scale, cost curves come down and they're pretty much equivalent with their from a cost perspective with their carbon intensive counterparts. And that's what we look to. And really another important data point for us is we want to see those customers testing and trialing out of that pilot facility and really demanding larger volumes from a full-scale pilot, commercial plant, because they want to launch products themselves. So right now, that's an upside for us. Any kind of green premiums that come online, tax credits, whatever you want to call it, right? And so like I said, in this case, that particular underwrite went up in value significantly from the IRA. And we're holding a pretty firm line to that. I think that will be true for the next many investments that we make. But at some point, I'm wondering if there's going to be a flip where just to truly reach net carbon zero, we are going to have to pay higher prices for some goods and services. Right now, the industry is still in a place where we can be identifying those technologies where you don't need the green premium. And right now, it's very rare to find individuals or corporates, supply chains, et cetera, willing to pay a significant green premium. But I think at some point in the long journey to 2050, I just don't believe that everything is going to be able to be at cost parity with their carbon intensive counterparts, but we're not there yet. So right now we're still really disciplined in our underwrite, and right now that's the right thing to do.
And I'm hoping the audience, especially those from governments and politicians, are listening, because it takes a village. And I think what you're describing makes a lot of sense. I want to talk about your firm a little bit. As a joint venture between BlackRock and Temasek, what is Decarbonization Partners' role on accelerating that decarbonization? And you already talked a little bit about where you invest and how you invest and how you help scale, but the acceleration part.
Yeah, so part of it is, frankly, to be wildly successful investors to encourage more capital into the space. And this is Temasek and BlackRock's dedicated decarbonization platform. It doesn't mean that there's lots of other activities in BlackRock and lots of other activities in Temasek that have some decarbonization activities, but this is their dedicated decarbonization platform that they're doing together, focused on late venture early growth. Again, scale up. And they have committed $600 million to the activity set. What's interesting about that $600 million is it's $300 million for Fund 1, $300 million for Fund 2. And then we're raising external capital as well, which I'll talk about in another time. But that's significant seed capital to start executing against, right? The reason they didn't put it all in Fund 1 is to give a signal to the market that this is beyond just Fund 1. This is a platform. It's going to be a series of funds and a series of different types of funds because it's a big investment opportunity, right? But honestly, a huge part of our success has to be the world needs 2,000 decarbonization partners, right? You need 2,000 funds like us. And, you know, I'm not even exaggerating very much to make a point. It's a big number. And one of the interesting things, every once in a while I'll get asked, like, oh, is so-and-so a competitor of yours? There's like 5 or 6 of us investing kind of in this late venture early growth phase, deploying significant tickets, like 100 million at a pop, right? What I always say is, we have a co-investment model and we need great co-investors and we need more funds in the space, not less. So ultimately, Nicholas, how we accelerate is the few of us that are doing this, willing to do these really capital intensive projects, these first time plants, we need to be really good and successful at doing it to show the startup and investor community it is a historic investment opportunity and we need more capital, not less. So how we accelerate is by catalyzing additional investment dollars beyond just decarbonization partners. Does that make sense?
I love it. And I think it's what we need to do. And you're right, if we show success, more investors will come. If we don't show success, that doesn't work. So we have a question from the audience, Daniel Matisse, a good friend, that receives the most upvotes in the Q&A section. It's around hydrogen. The question is, how big of a role do you think hydrogen play in energy transition, and which industries and innovations will be impacted the most by hydrogen adoption? It's really about the impact.
So I like to play a game with myself to try to answer questions like this. So let's even go beyond 2050. Throw your mind to, let's do, instead of 2050, 2090, 2099, what does the world look like? In that world, hydrogen is everywhere. It is on planes, it's in cars, it has loads of industrial uses, it's used everywhere and it permeates everything because it's powerful, it's cheap to make, it's clean, it's emissions free, right? It'll be cheap. It's going to be an inexpensive source of energy. So that I know by 2099. Where will we be in 2050? People are still kind of scared of hydrogen. They have images of exploding planes and exploding vehicles, but it will be a source of energy. It will be used in transportation in 2050 to some degree. It will be used in power, right? So it's going to be a part of the journey. So to answer your question, it will eventually be everywhere. What I don't know yet is the timing. I gave you a long answer to your question. The short answer is in a truly net carbon world and beyond, it will be hugely disruptive to the world that we see now. And it will permeate all aspects of our lives as a cheap, reliable, and clean source of energy.
And I think that's where the long-term view really matters. If you're only thinking 10 years, a lot of challenges. You're looking 2050, a lot of things are obvious.
That's why I constantly throw myself in the future, Nicholas, because I go, oh, I don't know if that'll happen. And I go, well, but wait, in a far distant future, I know it will. So what's the journey, right?
Yeah. And when we talk about venture capital, it's about being right a little early.
Yes.
Everyone thinks you're wrong, right? So hopefully we are just at the point where we start to get momentum and more people seeing the same thing. Let's talk about what we are lacking. Do you think it's money, it's policies, it's technology? If you had a magic wand, you wish you could improve one thing about the full ecosystem?
Yeah. So, what's interesting for those of us that have been investing in this space for a long time, 15 years ago, those of us investing in climate tech or the energy transition, if you just think about the journey, 15 years ago, we were calling it alternative energy, right? Everything that we were doing was to invest in the energy transition. For those that actually were thinking that further ahead, if you just take my journey at BP, I wasn't sitting in the main part of BP. I was sitting in a little business of BP called Alternative Energy. And it was a little venture capital activity to support a little business called Alternative Energy in BP, which is now a huge part of BP. But at the time, BP was trying to think ahead, okay? But we called it Alternative Energy. And then we called it Clean Tech 1.0. We all know what happened there. Then we called it Clean Tech 2.0. Then we called it Climate Tech. And now we're all calling it decarbonization and support, really powerful language, decarbonization and support of net zero, right? So it's been a journey. What's different now than 15 years ago, and I've mentioned some of the macro forces. Yes, we have the learnings, huge. We understand timelines and difficulties much better. But the macro environment, 15 years ago, there was no net zero language. We'd never even heard that, right? You didn't have corporations, whole countries, cities with net zero commitments. The capital is available today. The technology is ready. So if I could go back 15 years and tell my younger self what was going to happen 15 years later, first of all, I think I would have been shocked at how long it took, to be fair. But that there would be a time where we weren't the stepchild. We weren't those, crazy Californians, right? That it's mainstream. I would argue it's the most significant area of focus of investment globally right now. It's the hot area to invest in instead of, the stepchild, right? So really, Nicholas, now we just got to do it right. We've been given all the ingredients. Now we need to stay disciplined and focused and be really great at what we do. Not start throwing money around crazily, right? Stay disciplined, fundamentalist investors, and invest in the right technologies that can help us get there. And to do it with lots of transparency, communication, and partnership with corporations, with each other as investors, with governments, because now it's execution. We've got everything we need. Now it's execution risk.
It's really nice. And I think a golden nugget, which is we have everything to make it work, but we have to be disciplined. It's a long journey of 30 years, but we have to show the path is a good path and others can join. I want to talk about the lessons learned. So Cleantech 1.0, sometimes people see it as a failure. I actually think that there was good lessons to be learned and some lessons were learned which were the wrong ones. So I want to hear from you what you thought was the biggest lesson that we should keep in mind for Cleantech 1.0, but actually the one that people thought was mistakes, but actually they proved later, with a longer term view, they proved to be very good success.
Yeah, Nicholas, hindsight's 2020, as they say, right? And most journeys are like this, right? As long as you're going up and to the right, but man, when you're in those dips, it feels like you're going
painful.
back, right? It's painful. So that's what Clean Tech 1.0 was. Of course, it was an important part of the journey to 2050. Of course, it was. All right, but ended up being a dip. It was, but there were some real lessons that we learned there, and just I can share, the personal lessons that I learned. One is the technologies took much, much longer to get out of the lab and into anything that was commercially viable than anyone ever assumed. All right, and that was really hard on a lot of Series A investors with their 10-year funds. And some of those companies did really well, but those in the Series A, outside of their fund life, it was all very complicated. Two, life cycle analyses weren't mature. They're still hardly mature now. They're very hard to do right. And just one glaring example that I was very involved in at the time was the whole biofuels boom, right? Of course it made sense. A plant-based fuel, of course, is going to be better for the environment than a petroleum-based fuel. Not necessarily. Of course, we got into the food versus fuel debate. We got into land use arguments. We discovered how land use was really critical to whether or not you were decarbonizing or carbonizing, right? And that land is a huge carbon sink, right? So it became incredibly, incredibly complicated to understand how life cycle analysis actually needed to be done to come out with a relevant answer. So we understand much more just about the carbon life cycle, to be honest. For me, it was about timeframes. It was about failure rates. I think clean tech more than anything else, when you're looking at seed and Series A, one success out of 10, it's really those traditional venture capital statistics there. Timelines, understanding risk, understanding life cycle analysis. What I would say, I do think it scared the investment. There were so many losses. I do think it scared the investment world for a while. And it wasn't till the specter of not reaching anywhere near net zero by 2050 and burning down the house where it's taken us a lot longer to see that momentum pick back up and really support this next wave. So I think the losses from Clean Tech 1.0 slowed us down. But maybe not in the fullness of time, that isn't even true, Nicholas, because we're taking all those hard lessons learned and applying them to what we're doing now. And that includes from a government perspective as well, just how they're investing and how they're spending their money. It's about that disciplined approach. What we're doing is hard.
I can't disagree. I'm fully agreeing. I have so many more questions, but I want to take one more question from the audience. Siddharth from Bangalore. How do you envision decarbonization happening across Asia, EMEA, and Africa, where market dynamics are very different from West, and adoption of new technologies remains a challenge due to several reasons like cost, policy, infrastructure?
Yes. So the opportunities that we're seeing that are directly in APAC, for example, you're right. It's much less around pure tech innovation. It's more around scale up. So what we think that we're going to see more from our portfolio, don't get me wrong, there will be some direct investments in those regions, but how those regions are going to play the most important role in our portfolio is in the scale up. So of the second, third plants of these companies, plant one might be in the US, but that second and third plants going to be in APAC. Right. And so that's where so many of the logistics and supply chains are. It's where the customers of the end users, some of the biggest markets of the end users of the products that our portfolio companies are making are in those regions. So you're absolutely right. Those regions' contributions to the net carbon zero journey are different. But they're no less impactful. It's just a different piece of, that complex puzzle I say that we have to put together. It's just a different piece of the puzzle.
Well, Meghan, my sincere thank you for sharing your perspective, your insights, and answering the questions from the audience. For all of you in the audience who joined us during this session, thank you for taking the time to participate. I see all these little hearts floating, so clearly people love to hear about what you said, Meghan. The next session, which is starting in 2 minutes, will dig even deeper with a panel discussion on the future of green hydrogen and chemicals. I hope you all enjoyed Energy Week 2022. And Meghan, thank you again.
Thank you, Nicholas. It was wonderful speaking to you as always.